I'm now joined by Stan Lalor, who's Research Officer in Teagasc in Johnstown Castle. Stan is lead author on the recently published Fertiliser Survey for Ireland. And Stan, could you tell us what were the major trends that you noticed during your survey?
In the most recent survey report, what we published was the fertiliser use data from the years 2004 to 2008. And during that period, what we found was that there was a dramatic decrease in the fertiliser usage, both at a national level and within each individual crop, in the nutrients N, P and K. What was probably most interesting from the results was the fact that the reduction in nitrogen usage, although there was a reduction in nitrogen usage, it wasn't as high as the reduction in P and K usage. At a national level, nitrogen usage was down 20% in that period, whereas P and K usage were both down almost 40% in that period.
And Stan, what were the key drivers for this change?
Well, there are a number of reasons that could explain why we saw this dramatic decrease in fertiliser use. Firstly, I suppose what happened in that period was that the nitrates regulations came into being in 2006, and what that brought about was that for the first time farmers were actually restricted in terms of the total amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus fertiliser that they could use on their farm. So that would have had an impact in terms of the fertiliser usage as a result. Another factor that would have come into play in that period was that the usage of organic fertilisers in terms of replacing chemical fertilisers and improving the use efficiency of things like slurry and farmyard manure also would have improved as a result of some of the findings of our research in Teagasc and the rollout of that research through our advisory services. But probably the biggest factor in that period that would have affected the fertiliser use was the huge increase in fertiliser prices that occurred in the years 2008 and followed into 2009. Particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, huge increases on the world fertiliser markets for those products, and that would have impacted on the price here and subsequently on the usage here.
Stan, were there any major positives or negatives coming from this survey?
Well, I suppose on the plus side there are positives to reduce fertiliser usage. First of all, from a farmer's perspective, if he's using less fertiliser, his fertiliser costs are down, and that may have an impact in terms of the overall farm profit. And certainly with the way we're moving in agriculture, we're moving towards low-cost systems, and reduction in fertiliser bill will obviously be a positive for the farmer. Another positive is that if we are reducing our dependence on chemical fertilisers, that means that our nutrient efficiency might be increasing, and therefore we're getting better value out of the nutrients that we're putting into the ground. And from an environmental perspective, this is a positive because there will be a reduction in the nutrient surplus that will be available for environmental loss subsequently. So from the point of view of farm costs and for the environment, a reduction in the fertiliser use might be a positive.
And is there any danger that it may have swung the other direction in terms of affecting yield or under application of fertiliser?
Well, within the report we don't have that data available to us, but certainly the key concern out of all this is that with the very dramatic decreases that we have seen in fertiliser usage, for example, P and K usage is now at the levels it was at in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, granted, we would have higher soil fertility levels now than we would have had in that period, but certainly, the reduction has been very dramatic. And the fear into the future is that we are now perhaps putting back less fertiliser, P and K, than we would be removing in crops. And then the potential negative impact of that is that over time we may be reducing our soil fertility levels. The trouble we have in terms of detecting that effect is that the response in terms of soil fertility will be quite slow and quite difficult to detect. So what we might be doing is running ourselves into a problem quite a bit into the future. But I think it's very important to bear in mind that we need to be putting back nutrients into the soil that we are removing in crops in order not to jeopardise soil fertility into the future. The other possible negative in all this is that P and K reduction was a lot higher proportionally than nitrogen. And what that means is that nitrogen efficiency in the future may be affected because there's less P and K in the system to drive the system that we're depending on from the nitrogen fertiliser application. So in the future we may see an impact on nitrogen use efficiency, particularly with a nutrient such as potassium, which is very tightly associated with nitrogen use in the plant. We may see an impact because the reduction in P and K usage is a lot lower than it has been for nitrogen.
Stan, what does the future hold in terms of fertiliser use in Ireland?
I think what we need to do in terms of monitoring fertiliser use into the future is continue with this type of survey work, which is a huge resource in terms of monitoring what is actually happening on the ground. But associated with that, what we need to do is look in more detail at the impact on soil fertility over time, and that will include research work trying to increase our knowledge in terms of what is happening in soils, in terms of the major nutrients P and K, and also other nutrients, and in particular soil pH.